Welcome again and good morning. Okay, we'll be joined today by SSK-12 and other divisions in OSSI today as we go through the October presentation for Special Ed Points of Contact. In this month's presentation, we will review child count, some FAQs from last month's broadcast to answer your child count questions. Also, our main focus, our spotlight is on LEA responsibilities for students in non-public schools. So we have the non-public team here today to help us go through that information to present that to you today. We'll be talking about non-public access instead, attendance monitoring, and then service logging and documentation. And then we will close out our presentation this month with reminders and announcements from various teams. So let's go ahead and get started with today's presentation.
Good morning. This is Christy Weaver-Harris. I'm with OSSI's Division of K-12 Systems and Support. I'm going to go over some follow-ups on your questions from last month's webinar related to child count. So child count occurred last Monday, October 7th, but we've issued some additional child count guidance that to answer your questions from last month's webinar. You can access that in the Handouts tab. To clarify, LEAs are required to resolve Unified Data Errors, or UDEs, by November 14th of this year. If you need assistance with resolving a UDE, you need to submit your OST ticket by November 1. To give OSSI staff enough time to respond and take action on that OST ticket. Now it's up to LEAs to decide whether you need OSSI support to resolve your UDEs, as long as you're following the process. Good morning, this is Christy Weaver-Harris. I'm with OSSI's Division of K-12 Systems and Support. I'm going to go over some follow-ups on your questions from last month's webinar related to child count. So child count occurred last Monday, October 7th, but we've issued some additional child count guidance that to answer your questions from last month's webinar. You can access that in the Handouts tab. To clarify, LEAs are required to resolve Unified Data Errors, or UDEs, by November 14th of this year. If you need assistance with resolving a UDE, you need to submit your OST ticket by November 1. To give OSSI staff enough time to respond and take action on that OST ticket. Now it's up to LEAs to decide whether you need OSSI support to resolve your UDEs. As long as you're following the process for resolution, you should be good to go. But if you need assistance or action from OSSI, go ahead and submit those OST tickets by November 1. If you have students who graduated with a regular high school diploma following school year 18-19, you do not need to submit an OST ticket to get that student exited off of your SEDS roster. OSSI will be going through the list of certified graduates and making sure that we are administratively removing those students. That said, if you're getting close to November 1 and you're still seeing some of those students on your SEDS roster, it's not going to hurt to submit an OST ticket. But recognize that we're going to be getting a lot of OST tickets at that point. I just don't want to discourage you from submitting an OST ticket if you see something in your records that doesn't sit right or that you have concerns about. But you don't necessarily need to submit a ticket because we will be administratively exiting those students. Some clarifications around the Update IEP tab that is only to be used to update a student's educational environment. Now this goes back to what we've talked about before, where educational environment is not a description of the student's LRE. Educational environment is only an indicator for federal reporting purposes, and it does not print on the IEP. So we've gone and added the Update IEP tab to make sure that you can update that information administratively. We know that it was difficult for LEAs to communicate those requirements or that change to parents without it being on the IEP. So we added it to the IEP. That created a different set of problems. So now we removed it from the IEP again and created the Update IEP tab to make sure that you can make that change administratively. Now when you make that change, it is not changing the student's IEP. It's not changing the services the student gets. It's not changing the percentage of time that they're inside or outside of the LEA. There's just a couple of scenarios where the educational environment needs to be updated administratively. Two examples of that. One would be when a student turns age 6, the educational environments identified by the federal government for reporting purposes actually change at age 6. So there's a UDE error for a student has an educational environment that's appropriate for an age 5 student, but the student is age 6. So that's an example of when you would go in, use the Update IEP tab to select the right educational environment for that student now that they've turned 6, and the different set of educational environments is available for that student. We also see this with transfer students, where when a student transfers to a new LEA, or if there's a change or a different school within your LEA, or if there's a change in the school calendar, where that recalculation of the student's hours can maybe bump them between a different educational environment. So that's another instance where you would go back in and use the Update IEP tab to change that student's educational environment. Now, some questions that we've gotten around the change to educational environment instead. I think it was in April of last year, we changed what the labels were instead to be entirely consistent with what that federal reporting metric is. So here you will see what the current label is, and then on the right you'll see what the previous label instead was. Previously, these environments were described as the percentage of time that the student spends outside of the general education environment, but for federal reporting purposes, we must report the percentage of time spent inside the general education environment. That's led to a lot of confusion. So you can see here where we've given the percentage brackets for what you should be using to determine which educational environment that student should be in. In addition, we have added an educational environment within SEDS for students who are parentally placed in private schools. That's relevant for DCPS only, but I did want to flag for you guys that that's in there now. Otherwise, the educational environments are the same. So correctional facility is still in there, separate school, all that information is still in there. This is just for the percentages. We wanted to be clear about which percentage you should be selecting for those students. We've got a lot of questions about how to calculate the percentages and whether to round up or down. SEDS automatically does the rounding for you. You really should just be selecting the percentages that are consistent with what you're already seeing instead. So, for example, SEDS calculates the percentage of times the student is serviced outside of the general education environment, while the label is described in terms of being inside the general education environment. We know that that's confusing, but that's why we've given you this chart to help you make better decisions around that. So for a student who is, the percentage of time that they spend outside of the general education classroom is between 0 and 20.99%. You're going to want to select the label of inside regular class 80% or more of the day. If you have any questions about that, please go ahead and type that in your chat box, or we're happy to clarify. But again, we've issued some additional FAQs about this that are available within the handouts tab. And also, if you go to on OSSE's website where the enrollment audit and child count guidance is, it's also provided that you can find a link to the FAQs there too. So if you have any questions about that, please go ahead and type them in your chat box. All right, now we're going to turn it over to our non-public teams to give you an overview of LEA responsibilities for students placed in non-public schools, and also some information about the data systems that are required for non-public students.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. My name is Sharon Powell. I'm an education program specialist with the non-public monitoring team. To start off with, we'd like to give you an overview of the local regulations that pertain specifically to special education and non-public school placement. So here, in the second bullet, you see reference to a regulatory citation, DCMR Title 5-A, Chapter 28. And Chapter 28, as you can see here in this slide, relates to non-public special education schools and programs serving students with disabilities funded by the District of Columbia government and rate-setting requirements for those schools and programs. So for those of you who are not very familiar with the DCMR, Title 5 is the title within the DCMR that's dedicated to education. Subtitle A is the section for OSSE, the state education agency for the District of Columbia, and Chapter 28 is the chapter within the DCMR that contains the regulatory requirements that govern the operation of non-public special education schools and programs that hold a certificate of approval from OSSE. If you represent an LEA that has students placed in a non-public school, and or if you're responsible for monitoring the progress and safety of a student or students placed in a non-public setting, you should be familiar with this chapter. LEA responsibilities for students. Here, let's see, now on the third bullet, LEA responsibilities for students placed in non-public schools are outlined in section 2808, and we'll look at the requirements in this section a little bit more closely in the next slide. Then moving on to the next bullet, so Title V, Subtitle E, Chapter 30, is the original Title V, which was promulgated before OSSI came into existence. Some sections of Subtitle V have been repealed and replaced, but others remain in effect, including Chapter 30. Subsection 3019 speaks directly to public charter school responsibilities, so the responsibilities of all LEAs in DC, other than DCPS. Subsection 3019 starts off by stating, just to give you a sense of the content, that enrollment in a public charter school shall be open to all residents and wards of the District of Columbia, regardless of disability or special need. A public charter school in the District of Columbia may not deny enrollment or otherwise discriminate in its admissions policies and practices on the basis of a child's disability or status as a child with special needs. The child's needs or potential need for special education, services, supplementary aids or services, and any other accommodation. Then it goes on to say that each LEA charter is responsible for compliance with all requirements applicable to an LEA under IDEA and its implementing regulations, including least restrictive environment, evaluation and reevaluation, special education and related services, statewide assessments, policies and procedures, SEDS, due process complaints, and mediation. Then lastly, there's OSSI's policies and procedures for placement review. These procedures serve to clarify OSSI's expectations regarding changes to a child's placement that result in a more restrictive environment as outlined in IDEA. This policy first took effect in January 2010. So, then moving on to the next slide, we see here 3 of the provisions under 2808. So here under 2808.1, we have the LEA in which the student is enrolled and the non-public school at which the student is placed are both responsible for ensuring the student has a complete and current IEP. Subsection 2 states that the sending LEA shall ensure that all data required by OSSI regarding a student with a disability placed in non-public school is entered into SEDS and that such data is accurate and up-to-date and complete. One of the main problems we run into when LEAs are struggling to comply with 2808.2 is that simply students attending school in SEDS has not been updated. So you would need to reach out to your registrar so that they can update the student information system so that it accurately reflects that new non-public placement. And then in the last bullet, pursuant to, in 2808.4, states that a sending LEA shall remain responsible for compliance with the requirements of IDEA for serving students served by non-public special education schools and programs, and OSSI shall monitor the sending LEA's compliance with these requirements. So when a student transitions from an LEA to a non-public school, responsibility for the student does not transfer from the LEA to the non-public. It's shared by both the LEA and the non-public, with the LEA remaining ultimately responsible for ensuring FAPE. And just additionally, under 2808.9, a non-public special education school or program must monitor how each student is making progress towards meeting the annual goals of the IEP and produce a written report for parents and the sending LEA on at least a quarterly basis. I think the CFR does not provide any specific time frame, but here in the DCMR, we have the requirement for the production of progress reports on a quarterly basis, and reviewing these quarterly reports is one of the key ways that LEAs can monitor student progress from a distance. And then on the next slide, this, so along with the local regulations that are outlined in DCMR, we also have the federal regulations that are outlined in the CFR, the Code of Federal Regulations, and here you see kind of repeated the similar requirements, and I think we're going to get into those a little bit more later in the presentation. So looking at responsibilities such as evaluations, reevaluations, that they occur in a timely manner, and that the LEA representative is attending that annual IEP meeting to ensure that the IEP is reviewed and revised at least on an annual basis. Then the progress monitoring, ensuring that each student participates in the statewide assessment and meets the accountability requirements under the SEA, and that that a plan is developed for the child to return to the non-public school, or from the non-public school to the charter as soon as appropriate. And then, okay, I think there's on the next slide. Yeah, so similarly, the same type of requirements that are found under the local regulations. And then, oh, you did that. Okay, and then a student with a disability placed in non-public school remains enrolled in the LEA when the child is placed in the non-public school, and must transition, again, back to a less restrictive environment as soon as is practicable. And the non-public school must maintain capacity to serve this child and continue to monitor the student's progress. If the student attending a non-public school has not transitioned out of the non-public school with 120 days at the end of the school year in which the child will exceed the maximum age range for children served by a public charter LEA, the LEA shall provide written notification at least 90 days before the end of the school year.
Okay, thank you so much. So that summarizes the LEA's responsibilities for students at non-public schools. The way I like to remember this is, the LEA is responsible for access, entry, and accuracy, making sure that the non-public schools and users have access to SES, making sure that they are entering information in SES, and also ensuring the accuracy of that information that has been entered. As we move further in this presentation, we want to talk about some of the ways in that your non-public staff gains access in SES. What does that really look like? That is the next portion of our presentation that will be given by Pauline Miller-John of Division of Data Assessment and Research. Pauline?
Thank you, Rita. So I just wanted to cover briefly about account management for related service providers. LEA SPED POCs are responsible for protecting the privacy of student information by controlling the access of student files and SED. So the LEA POC should not create aggregate accounts. Aggregate accounts are typically created by OSSI for related service providers who need access to multiple LEAs. How would you do that? You will request access via an OST ticket. OSSI will then add the user to the LEA SED site. The LEA SPED POC will give only the specific school in which the user should get access to. So if the user is requesting access to Accounting, the LEA will give access only to Accounting. It would not give access to anyone else or any other school within the preview for that user. The LEA SPED POC will then add the student to the caseload. One thing I want to clarify, please make sure before requesting access to OSC for users to be added that the student is actually enrolled at your non-public school. Make sure there's an enrollment at the non-public school before we request access for the non-public user to gain access to that LEA. What we're finding is that a lot of students are not enrolled and they're requesting access to those schools, and if we do not see an non-public student enrolled at that school, we would not give access to that LEA. Okay, So SED access for non-public starts requires OSSI, the non-public, and the LEAs to work together, which are the key players. So both the LEA SPED POC and the non-public SPED POC can request access for a user to SED. So non-public SED's point of contact, each campus has been designated POC who's responsible for coordinating SED access for the non-public staff, for also training the non-public staff on how to use SED. The LEA SPED POC is responsible for overseeing the SED access for any user, including non-public users who serve students from that LEA. The LEA SPED POC directly controls the student files a user can access. OSSI does not grant or does not give access to student records. We only provide access to aggregate account access. We don't have any control over providing caseload for non-public staff. The OSSI help desk staff will then give access to that user for an aggregate account via the OSSI support tool. So again, I want to reiterate that the OSSI SPED POC and the LEA can communicate with the help desk, and they are the ones that can control how the user gets access. Please make sure, again, that the students are enrolled at the non-public school before requesting access to that LEA.
Great. Thank you so much, Pauline. So now we know what is required for a non-public staff to get access in SED, who can contact the OSSI help desk and create an OST ticket. Next, we want to hear about some of the ways that students at non-public schools are monitored. And so we're going to now talk about attendance monitoring for non-public schools.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Jackie Corsi, and I'm the program analyst in the Medicaid Recovery and Non-Public Unit. And I'm going to go ahead and go over briefly the SEATS overview. And for those of you who may or may not be familiar with SEATS, it stands for the Special Education Attendance Tracking System. Now, SEATS is OSSI's response to a need to create a systemic method for collecting attendance information for all DC special education students who attend the non-public program. With SEATS, you'll be able to create a system of record for the district non-public school student attendance data. It institutes a change management process that will keep the attendance tracking system up to date. It supports the inclusion of any comments or supporting documentation that you may have to go along with the attendance records. Some of the highlights in the SEATS program is that SEATS is a web-based program access. It has preloaded schools and campuses and student rosters. It supports the documentation and comments that you may have entered or will be entering. It gives weekly automated reminders. It also has visual alerts when absence thresholds are met. It allows for student entry date adjustments. You can lock or unlock attendance functions supporting the change management, secure permission-based and password-protected access. Attendance reports in SEATS and SLED. Data views in SLED are for LEAs and OSSI only. Next, we'll go over the users and functions of SEATS. Now, the SEATS non-public permission levels will include the schools, and the schools can only see the campuses that are under that school. And for campuses, they can only view that specific campus that they were assigned to. For the non-public program, you'll be able to record, submit, review, recall, and request attendance information. For the LEA, the local education agency, you'll be able to load the student files, unlock any records that may have become locked over a period of time, and view. The role for OSSI would be to just view, support, and improve. Next, we'll just cover how SEATS works. Now, non-public campuses enter daily attendance codes, student supporting documents, and comments. Now, you'll receive visual alerts during any entry that you make for new student entry dates, student withdrawal dates, and any student absence thresholds that are reached. Recording attendance is done every Wednesday and Friday, and you'll receive an automatic reminder on Friday if the system does not record that, doesn't detect that any attendance information has been entered. The total submission for your attendance is done at the end of the month, and you can recall and edit up to that 5th working day of the month, and you'll see that a little later in a couple slides. After that 5th day, the system is going to lock, and you will no longer be able to have access to make any corrections. And to request an unlock so that you can get in if you realize that you do need to make some changes will have to be done by your LEA. And remember, data that's collected can be viewed in SLED by your LEA. For the process of recording attendance, it is a biweekly action. It's done every Wednesday and Friday. The attendance records are saved and is visible to the LEAs and OSSE via SLED. These records can be amended, and remember, weekly reminders are sent out to complete the attendance recording. And in this example here, you'll see that on Wednesday, January 27th, and then on Friday is when you'll make the submission. And again, if by Friday you haven't done it, you will receive a reminder to let you know that it's time to submit your attendance. When you're submitting the attendance entries, that's, again, a monthly action, and it's going to occur the last weekday of the month. Final submission asserts that the attendance data is accurate, and again, it is visible to the LEAs and OSSE. It can be amended within 5 weekdays, which is what we consider the recall period after the submission. So as you see here, the last one is submitted on Friday, and then you have that recall period of the 5 days, after which the record is locked, and you will not be able to go in and make any adjustments without going through your LEA. Now, in SEATS, you're able to run some reports to kind of help you monitor your attendance, and one of the reports is the attendance summary report. And as you can see here, you'll just select through a drop-down your school and campus name. You'll select the date range that you're wanting to view the report for. And each student that is within your campus or school will be shown, as well as the attendance for that period. Next is going to be the flag report, and the flag report displays the dates that the student had reached certain thresholds, and it will be visual by color coding, and it can indicate if the student has any EC or EM absences. And at the end of the screen, you'll be able to see what those color codes represent, as well as those being stated there, like your blue, for example, is your 5-day flag has been reached. Moving on to your green, which is the 10-day, and so forth. So you will have a color code key, too, at the bottom of your screen once you've entered the attendance or once you're viewing the report. Now, before we do, one last thing that I did want to say is that there is a help function. Once you actually log into SEATS, on your toolbar, you will see where it says help. And if you click on that help, it'll open up and it'll give you some information that can assist you as far as like if you need technical assistance, it'll provide a phone number, and that is available Monday through Friday from 8 to 5. And it will also provide you with a couple of quick reference reports. One of them, which would be how to, and give you the opportunity to open and save a SEATS quick reference guide, as well as a, just click even for the SEATS report. So you'll be able to click on those that are highlighted under the help function, and it'll provide you also with the SEATS FAQ. So if you have any questions, you can go there. Otherwise, we can be reached for assistance. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sharon. All right, Jackie. Sorry. All right, so we are talking about non-publics today. This is all about non-public. Thank you so much for that information about attendance monitoring. I know we get a lot of questions about that. So we've gone through the responsibilities, the legal, both local and federal requirements for non-publics. We talked about access and attendance. Now, in our next portion, we're going to talk about service logging and documentation. How do you know the students are actually receiving services at non-publics? That's the next section of what we'll look at, is the service logging for students and the services that they're receiving. So as we start talking about the service logging, just remember that LEAs must fully utilize and implement programs and processes to make sure that the data is accurate and complete, and then they have an up-to-date record in SES. And so, of course, you know, because we've gone through this already, that especially includes students placed in non-publics. So we want to ensure timely documentation of service provision. That means our providers logging these services that have been created for students, services that have been provided for students, ensuring that the students receive the services in accordance with their IEPs, and that the related services as prescribed on the IEP are also fulfilled. Timely documentation of the provision of service, and that's what we're looking at now. How do you ensure that this service logging has been complete? Well, first I want to walk through just the steps for service logging and verifying services. We've gotten quite a few messages back about people that need to log for other folks. I want to make sure that we just kind of walk through that so you know what the service logging looks like from the perspective of the provider of the service. So we're just going to walk through that. And then I'll show you where you can go to ensure that the services have actually been logged and a tracker has been created in the system. So as we're going through step one, where we are creating a service log, that's using the logging wizard, and that should happen within 5 business days of each session. And we're going to walk through that. So in step two, we're going to generate a service tracker. That's actually a way for the provider to finalize the information that has already been entered in the service logging wizard into a finalized PDF document that kind of brings all that information together for each student into a one-page report for you to be able to review. And then finally, they are responsible for completing a progress report at the end of the progress reporting period. So that means you, as the LEA POC, you need to ensure that the reporting dates have been entered in SES already so that your non-public folks that are doing progress reports are actually reporting at the correct reporting period. So let's get into it. First, we'll start in creating a delivered service log. Now, LEA POCs, you are responsible for ensuring that your related service providers know how to accurately log a service in SES. And we provided resources. There are some recorded resources that I will point you to at the end of this presentation that you can share out with providers on how to create these service logs. So your providers will go in and access the service logging wizard specific to their discipline. They need to enter the date that the service occurred, the service type. Was it a direct service? To also indicate if this is a makeup service. In our drop-down for the service delivery, that allows them to indicate the service delivery type in that drop-down and also the duration of a service. Remember, if it's a makeup service or the student missed a service, you should never be using 0 as the duration of service. You should always enter the number of minutes that you were slated to see a student or was already noted that the student would have 30 minutes per day or 60 minutes for that month. Whatever that time is, that's what you should be using. You should not be using 0 in the service duration. Additionally, in the group size, there's been a slight change in that area. I believe we made that change last year. You now have to use the exact size of the group. You cannot use a range. You used to have a range there, was from 0 to 3 or something like that. So 0 would never be an appropriate group size. We've removed that option instead. So you should be using the exact number for the group. And then any comments that should be entered can be entered in the text boxes at the bottom of the page, and they are very useful to be able to get additional notes about what happened in a particular delivered or missed session. And as I just said about missed sessions leading into this slide, you can also create service logs for missed services. So when a service is scheduled but it's missed, the related service provider must still create a log to reflect that. So you're creating a service log to reflect that time that was already scheduled to provide a service for a student was missed. And you need to indicate your reason. So you have on the right-hand side, if the student was absent or unavailable, you can use that it was attempted. If there was a school closure or the provider was unavailable, you can also use the not attempted here or delivered if it was a direct service that was delivered. And remember, we just talked about this. Never use 0 for the number of minutes for a missed service log. Finally, after entering the information for the service log, your related service provider will have an opportunity to either correct the log or say, yes, this information is correct, let me go ahead and log this service, or they can log another instance for the same student. So if I had to enter multiple service dates for the same student, I can do that in one screen. So that's what you need to do to ensure that the service logs have been entered. A last thing I wanted to include that is not here is that it should be communicated that your providers would create the service trackers on a monthly basis so that you have a PDF of all of the services that have been performed for the student. The service tracker is what shows you that information. One other thing I wanted to point out, now that I'm thinking about it, is that you also want to check to make sure that providers have not requested that any service logs be deleted. If a provider, made a mistake and needs to have a service log deleted, they will go in and they'll request deletion. If you're not checking that information, we could actually, you could actually have service logs that should have been deleted for a student. And it may make the numbers for the minutes of services provided look inaccurate if you were looking at the RSMR reporting or any of the other related service providing monitoring tools that we have or reports that we have. So just make sure that you're checking to make sure that your providers have not entered a request to delete any of those service logs. Okay. That concludes the portion on service logging and documentation. We talked a lot about non-publics today, and we talked about legal requirements, access, attendance monitoring, and also service logging. At this time, I'm going to turn it over for some announcements or reminders and announcements, and we will get started right now.
Good morning, everyone. This is Megan Williams from the IDA Compliance Monitoring Team. I know we've been discussing a lot of requirements around our non-public requirements. We are going to shift gears to IDEA monitoring for LEAs. So I'm going to go over an overview of a webinar that I gave about 2 weeks ago regarding the updates for DC CATs. And we're going to discuss 3 different changes that have been implemented in DC CATs. These are currently being implemented, So if you were not able to attend that webinar, this may be your first time hearing about it. I hope not. But like I said, this will discuss the changes that you will need to implement right now. So beginning the 2019 school year, LEAs now have responsibility for the following 3 processes in DC-CAT. The first one is uploading documentation of evidence for correction for Prong 1. So Prong 1 is that initial finding that you are issued as a result of noncompliance identified in our monitoring process. This isn't really a change. LEAs have been required to upload evidence of correction if they are marking an item as corrected. The change for this area is that the system will no longer let you mark corrected if you have not uploaded documentation. The second bucket is for initial evaluations and reevaluations compliance monitoring. LEAs will now be required to verify the reasons that the evaluation was untimely. We'll, in a few slides later, we will review the new drop-down options in DC-CAT, so you'll be required to select, and there'll be documentation required based on the item that you select. The third bucket is identifying student files for Prong 2. In the past, IDA monitors have gone into SEDS and randomly selected files to do a subsequent review to fully close out those findings that you were issued. Starting this school year, the LEAs will now be required to identify which student files should be reviewed for Prong 2. So the purpose of Prong 1 changes, as I stated before, this is Prong 1 are the initial findings that you were issued, and the LEA needing to correct that student level noncompliance. So the purpose is to ensure that identified noncompliance has been corrected prior to marking an item as corrected, and to allow LEAs to link a specific document to a specific item of noncompliance. There are some instances where, say for instance, the on-site student monitoring review, one student could have several instances of noncompliance in which you're uploading various pieces of documentation. The system will now allow you to link which specific piece of documentation goes along with the area of noncompliance. Down at the bottom, you'll see Prong 1 tutorial. This is available on the DC-CAT's website and this link here. It will show you exactly how you can upload that information and link it to the particular item of noncompliance. The purpose of the Prong 2 change. This is the process in which after you've closed out your student level noncompliance, keep in mind that that does not fully close out your finding. That's why we encourage you to correct any noncompliance within 90 days, as the Prong 2 process could take a little bit longer. So now LEAs will now be required to verify the student files, and the purpose of this is to simplify the selection process and provide LEAs with timely and regular feedback on noncompliance, and also give the LEAs more autonomy and control over the closure of their identified noncompliance, and provide a clear resolution when new data is not available. Same as the Prong 1 process, there is a Prong 2 tutorial linked down at the bottom. This is also available on the DC-CAT's website. These tutorials were also distributed to anyone who registered and attended the webinar 2 weeks ago. If you did not, please reach out to your IDA monitor and they will ensure that you are provided copies of the link. I will quickly go over the initial and reevaluations changes. So there are now drop-down options in DC-CAT that have been changed to where an LEA is now responsible for identifying the reason as evaluation was untimely. So those options are now corrected timely, corrected untimely. In the corrected untimely, if you select that, there will be additional drop-downs where you will either need to select the evaluation was untimely due to a parental delay. One thing I want to highlight here is that if it was due to a parental delay, you do need to upload your 3 different contact attempts. And that cannot be a screenshot of the communication log. It says we are not able to determine if those attempts were related to those evaluations. You will need to upload that specific piece of communication, not a screenshot or an exported version of the communication log. There's also the option of an LEA delay, other reasons, and then the student was not enrolled instead on the eligibility due date. Prior to this change, LEAs were able to mark that a student was no longer attending their LEA. Now we need to know whether or not the student was not attending your LEA on the date that the evaluation was due. So here's a screenshot of what the changes will look like. You'll see corrected timely, corrected untimely, and those additional drop downs, and student was not enrolled instead on the eligibility due date. And these are active in the system right now. The same reasons apply for untimely reevaluations. The only difference is that for the corrected untimely LEA delay, this asks if the student withdrew from your LEA and re-enrolled in your LEA 120 days prior to the eligibility due date. I do want to highlight that these are requirements in which we have to report the data to the Department of Education. So that's why some of the drop downs are very specific and may seem a bit weird, but these are the ways in which we have to report data. And here's another screenshot of the untimely evaluations, very similar to the initial evaluations drop down options.
Okay, thank you so much.
Okay, got it. Okay, okay, so we had a question pop up. We have had a couple of staff changes, and therefore some of the LEAs have had to be reassigned to IDEA monitors. If you are not aware of who your actual IDEA monitor is, send me an email and I will check the caseload and let you know. My name is Megan Williams. I can be reached at megan.williams@dc.gov. Got it. Okay. I'm going to go back really quick. So there was a question around what should be uploaded for LEA delay other reasons. So for this particular item, this is the only item in which an LEA would actually receive a finding. So if the delay was due to something other than a parental delay or other than a student withdrawing from your LEA and re-enrolling, everything else would fall under LEA delay. You would not, the only documentation you would need to upload is the completed eligibility determination. That is what we're looking for. A finding would still be issued because it was untimely, but in the event that it was not held, you would need to upload that. We would need to see that it was actually held.
So I want to clarify one thing. This is Christy Weaver-Harris. I want to clarify one thing that we went over earlier in the webinar. One of you pointed out that the percentages within that chart of between around educational environment were actually incorrect. For students who are educated within the general education environment, for inside the regular class, no more than 79% of the day and no less than 40% of the day. The percentage range there should be 21 to 59.99%, not 39.99%. And for students who are inside the regular class, less than 40% of the day, it should say the student is serviced outside of the general education environment for 60 to 100% of the day, not 40 to 100% of the day. We'll correct that in the slides that are posted on our website, and also we're going to correct it. It's corrected in the guidance that's being posted on the website right now. Thank you for pointing that out. That was a mathematical error. I'm not in education because I'm good at math.
Great. All right, thank you so much. As we are closing out, I just want to point out some training and resource information that's available that you can also share with your non-public counterparts. So there is Getting Started with SEDS, Related Service Provision 101. That's a recorded webinar that we did last year where we go into detail showing you how to do service logging, progress reports, and a number of other functions that are required for related service providers. We also have navigating the initial eligibility process in SEDS. This is also a recorded webinar that you can find on our website. The SEDS Basic User Guide. This is a information-packed manual that folks are actually updating right now to go along with some of the changes that we've been introducing to you in SEDS. And then, as always, you can access the previous LEA Special Ed POC monthly webinar recordings at our website. The link is available on your page. So on behalf of the SPED POC web team, I'd like to give a special thanks to all our guests and presenters today, Jackie Coursey, Christy Weaver-Harris, Jennifer Carpenter, Pauline Miller-John, Megan Williams, and Sharon Powell. Thank you all so much today for your time. If you have some additional questions, we will be on the line just a few minutes at the conclusion of this webinar. Thank you so much. Make the best of your day, the rest of your day. Have a great afternoon.